In our industry, there's a lot of change happening. The telecoms industry, if you look at something like a disruptor like WhatsApp, right? So WhatsApp comes in, it sits basically on top of your network. All of a sudden, everybody moves from sort of making voice calls and SMS, which is driving revenue, and they start using WhatsApp. That's a huge disruptor. You've got like the satellites coming now. All of these are disruptors. And so how fast can you adapt and be agile enough to deal with the change that's happening in the geopolitical environment? You've got wars cropping up all over the place. You've got these tariffs cropping up with China and the US. How fast can you adapt and adopt to those changing markets and the changing dynamics?
Thanks so much for joining another edition of the never-ending climb for stronger supply chain and procurement. Today, we have the pleasure of being joined by Andrew Savage from UAE. And Andrew has been passionate for a long time about building and running procurement centers of excellence. And that takes it all the way through from strategy, all the way down through the process and the tools. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, thanks, Sean. Thanks for the invite. I'm pleased to say that my background looks a lot more exciting than yours. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to the conversation today. Excited for it.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, my red brick wall behind me here. It's one of the oldest buildings in Calgary. It's a heritage building. We've got actually, fun random fact, just a little ways over there is, I think, the second oldest elevator in the entire city. Super cool bit of history.
We literally like chalk and cheese then because this is all the new shiny buildings of Dubai and the opposite to you, I guess.
Absolutely. There's absolutely no dropped ceiling tiles anywhere in
I
our
love
office.
that.
Very
Love
important.
it.
So when we were talking about, how we can help and serve the community, one of the things that came up, and it's kind of a basic question, but it's so important, and that is, Andrew, what is procurement? And how is it growing from like a keeper of POs to something so much more important, so much more strategic?
It's a really good question, Sean. I like to tell the story actually. It excites me about the sort of the evolution of procurement. And when I started out in procurement, it was very transactional. It was an execution on the business. It was placing purchase orders. It was heavily governed by red tape. It wasn't particular strategic function. It was literally just, I send my requirements over to you. You go and buy it. That's about it, right? And it was measured by savings and how fast it takes me to issue a PO. Fast forward let's say the 20 years since I've been working in this field. And I think now we operate at a really strategic level. And we've gone from that sort of purchasing to procurement and a little bit more. So very much a strategic enabler to deliver corporate strategy. And now if you think, of course, procurement was elevated massively through COVID. Everybody suddenly had all eyes on the supply chain team, all eyes on the procurement team. Are you protecting my supply? Are you ensuring that my prices don't go through the roof? So I think that was a bit of a catalyst for change. But again, fast forward another sort of few years on since COVID, and you see AI has exploded, right, across all industries, but specifically in procurement as well. I mean, we hear every single supplier now is selling AI tools, so you've also got to cut through the sort of the buzzword of AI and what is it actually delivering. But you see more and more, strategic delivery through procurement, and honestly, it fascinates me. So that evolution of procurement to where we are today as a strategic enabler, and it's a cliche phrase, I don't like it, get procurement have a seat at the table. Definitely, we are elevated to that status in that I don't think with many organizations you can deliver a solid corporate strategy without procurement being in the picture. So yeah, it fascinates me. That evolution is something that I love.
And one of the things that really strikes me is the role from the keeper of POs and the guys that just go buy something. As that's evolved, there's the opportunity for procurement, for supply chain teams to become a genuine change agent in the organization, to create and drive change that really hits the bottom line.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about the role of procurement supply chain, you've got a lot of process in there. Of course, if processes don't work well, if the tools don't work well, you can't execute. So your go-to-market strategy should be about how fast I can deliver. How fast can I get a product in the market? In our case, in the mobile telecoms industry, how fast can we get a subscriber connected? So rather than just replacing a PO, it's like, okay, how fast can I start bringing revenue into the business? So I see change agent or procurement as a change agent in a couple of different ways. It's driving the change industry-wise. So they're kind of connecting the market to your internal stakeholders. So my internal stakeholders have a requirement; they want to buy something, but we're the connectors to the market. So we're understanding sort of market trends, market insights, what the suppliers are working on, and we're bringing that to our stakeholders. So we're driving change from, let's say, a technology advancement perspective. And then also, if you take the macro environment and the amount of changes that's happening, geopolitics, etc., it's how we take that change or how we absorb that change and how fast we can react to it. And in our industry, there's a lot of change happening. In the telecoms industry, if you look at something like a disruptor like WhatsApp, right? So WhatsApp comes in, it sits basically on top of your network. All of a sudden, everybody moves from sort of making voice calls and SMS, which is driving revenue, and they start using WhatsApp. So you've got, that's a huge disruptor. You've got like the satellites coming now. All of these are disruptors. And so how fast can you adapt and be agile enough to deal with the change that's happening in the market, the change that's happening in the geopolitical environment? You've got wars cropping up all over the place. You've got these tariffs cropping up with China and the US. How fast can you adapt and adopt to those changing markets and the changing dynamics? So again, it's fascinating. But I really see, in my position from a procurement excellence perspective, we're doing a lot in the sort of the AI space, advanced analytics, the tools that we build here, the processes that we change. Those are really enablers to how fast we can deliver products, and that is changing the business. I give one really good example, right, of how procurement has changed. I'll say innovation, right? So technology innovation within telco. The standard RFP process that everybody goes through in procurement. What do? The request comes from the business, and we have a very detailed scope of work, effectively saying, this is exactly what I want to buy. That goes out to market, and then all of the vendors come back and they say, okay, here you are, XYZ, I've ticked all of your boxes. Where's the innovation, right? So what do? We introduce something called like an open scope RFP. What if you sat in front of 5 or 6 vendors and you went with a business, a problem statement or unmet business need, right? And you just say, this is the problem that I'm trying to solve. You go away and you freestyle your approach to me. Then that's real innovation. Then I'm getting all sorts of different answers. Then I'm building my scope because I'm not the expert. The stakeholder is very well versed in that industry, but they might not know all of the latest trends, all of the latest features that are coming. So, and I think that also helps to stop bloated scopes as well. You get sort of really what you need to satisfy your requirements. So they're the sorts of things that we can introduce to the organization, which drive change. They drive innovation, and that's for me that's absolutely phenomenal for a procurement organization to drive that type of change through a multinational.
My favorite thing about creating that opportunity for change agent and driving away from the purely here are my requirements now bid is if you're buying pencils, it's not so bad. But if you are buying a solution to a business problem, I think you nailed it. And this is probably one of the most important parts, but it takes humility. And there's a lot of business leaders that maybe could use an extra dose of that because when they go to market with a set of requirements, those requirements are often based out of the imagination or the limits of the imagination, anchored in the way they do it today. And this, I 100% support the idea of co-creating and running a small pilot with a handful of vendors that have been invited to get a new perspective on what good looks like. And I love that you're driving that because I think there is an opportunity for more leaders in procurement to do exactly what you were just highlighting. And whether it's an open bid or whether it's, a handful of tightly run joint pilots, those are going to unlock the art of the possible and the a new definition of what good looks like. Because if you go to the business and you say, what are your requirements? And you go put that out in an RFP, you're going to get basically a newer, slightly more modern version of the way you were always doing it. And that kind of incrementalism is how companies get left behind. And I love that you're driving that because I think there is a massive opportunity for more companies to do that. To so many wasted opportunities of 10, $20 million invested, $2 million invested. It doesn't really matter how big it is, but it's a material investment for an organization that was fundamentally wasted on a newer version of the way they always did it.
Yeah, 100%. You're correct there, Sean, and you're also correct in terms of it does take humility, right? And there's a quite a complex sort of change management element around that, and
Yeah,
education to the to the wider business on why you should do this. And of course, you allow the stakeholders to come in with the sort of the minimum requirements and some guidance for the suppliers in terms of how do I guide them towards the area that I want and what are my my must-haves. But everything else, if you can open up that scope completely, and then you take a look. Obviously, you have to build the sort of the governance around it so that you're locking the scope at each sort of iteration, let's say.
bingo.
But that's really agile because then if something comes up within the scope that you've not thought of, and I guess this is one of the key elements of why that sort of agile approach works because you may well have scoped something. Now, if you're scoring a vendor against that rigid scope that you put together and something crops up within the round of the RFP that you think, actually, that's a really good idea. Unless I'm able to pivot and change my scope sort of on the fly and republish something, I effectively have to start the process again, which of course I lose time. So if I can kind of co-create and craft the scope as a go, I think I really like that feature. I'm going to bring that into my scope. No, I don't require that feature. I'm going to remove that one, and then I lock that sort of first part of the scope. Then I move on to the next iteration, and then I go through that cycle and then we end up delivering. So I think the overall process is much faster.
Yeah.
It drives innovation, and then of course your stakeholders are sort of co-creating that scope with you, with the supplier. So it also builds that relationship and it nurtures that sort of joint innovation as well. So I really like that idea, and it's been we've had a lot of success with that on some of the big strategic deals that we've run here at MTM.
Yeah, I think some of the most, I'll call it some of the, we talked a little before we pressed record about this idea of the David versus Goliath. And I know for our team, we've won some tremendous deals where others would look from the outside and go, what? But they haven't raised any money. How did, but, we've ended up beating very large organizations that have either been around for a very long time or they have raised spectacular amounts of money because we've been able to come in and demonstrate something that had not been imagined. And I think that door is so important to keep open because no matter which category you're buying from, that you will find a vendor that is excited to partner with you.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I think that is part of the agility because that's really that key. And whether it's a just discrete agile implementation approach or where you're creating the stories and the story points and allocating effort, or whether it's responding to a geopolitical shift, that agility and how to stay on top of changes in the world around you, changes from AI, changes from other technologies, etc., and how do you adapt and overcome those? That ability to stay agile with that spirit of, look, we've just got to keep climbing. What advice would you have for leaders that maybe could use a little extra inspiration around that?
The topic that you bring up about the sort of the David versus Goliath, I like that one because we work with with a broad spectrum of suppliers, some very, very small. We operate in 16 markets across Africa. So we've got a lot of some local players there. We also work with some huge international players, especially on the network side. That co-creation with a lot of the smaller vendors works really well, but it can also work with the larger vendors. And I think, if I had advice in terms of how do you build this in and how do you really nurture that type of agility, I think you need to test it, right? And the small vendor, people think small vendors are easier to flex, they're easier to work with, they're easier to change their models a little bit. Larger vendors tend to be a bit more rigid. They've probably got a lot of investment and already rolled out a large solution. But we've been successful on both sides. So I think it's a case of you've got to execute on something, and execution for me is one of my favorite words when I'm speaking to my team, right? Because I love the execution part of it. Every people are very good at saying, "Yeah, we could do this," and agile is something that we want to work on. But actually, the rubber to the road is what matters, and you've got to execute on it. And picking up whether it's a small vendor or a large vendor, you've got to go in there and say, "Okay, I'm going to build the rules around how I do this." But I've got to do it, and I've got to launch it, and there's the execution, and this is how I'm going to do it. And you get the people around you that execute, and I think that's we've been very successful. I've managed to hire really, really good people that work with me, very strongly focused on execution, and that for me is key to being successful and to really driving that change from a leadership perspective. Is hiring really curious people who actually want to make a difference. And then getting people that really relentlessly execute, and they go all over the business to ensure that they're speaking to the right people to execute. So I think it's about just taking that initiative and not just leaving. PowerPoint presentations are they have their time and their place, but really everything needs to be executable, and don't overcomplicate things. I typically keep everything very, very simple. If I don't understand it within the first 5 minutes, then I'll lose focus and I say, okay, let's move on, or we need to simplify. And often the most simplest ways of moving forward are the most executable. The same with digital tools, right? We execute a lot of digital tools here and there. The more complex they are, the longer it takes to execute. You have a ton of different features. Simplification works. It's most effective, and that's really how we deliver change.
I love the emphasis on start, right? On execute, on deliver. There's way too many organizations spend entirely too much time navel gazing, theorizing, strategizing, and the best strategies, of course, will be outpaced by those that actually do.
Absolutely.
Andrew, I am grateful for your time today. I am also grateful to have had the privilege of watching a sunrise in your background as we've been talking. And I think everybody who is looking to go make a difference, who's looking to drive and show more strategic value to change and to create that ability to adapt, has much to learn from you today. Thank you again so much.
Awesome. Thanks for inviting me on, Sean. I really enjoyed it.
Amazing. And for everybody watching, this has been another edition of The Never Ending Climb for a Stronger Supply Chain and Procurement. Thanks, everyone. See you next week.